Rachel, what's up?
Hey, Jay, what's up?
Not much. What's on your mind?
I just saw, I sent it to your inbox. It looks like James Lindsay wrote a giant wall of text about a clip of Andrew on trigonometry where Andrew is saying that Christianity is not a pacifist religion and Lindsay is calling him a Marcionist or a Marcionite or something. Just wondering if you had seen it and if you had a take on what he's saying.
We were going to cover the trigonometry discussion because Kai reached out to me and said that Andrew's discussion was one of the best that he's heard in terms of conveying to people in the political sphere how you can't really have a worldview, or you can't really do politics without having a worldview, and that every position kind of has an underlying paradigm or worldview. So we were going to play that clip, but I didn't know that Lindsay said that. But I'm not surprised because James Lindsay is an absolute idiot when it comes to any of these topics, and we can see that if he's saying that Andrew's position of kind of if the position that the state has a duty to Christianity or to God, that's like the opposite of Marcionism.
Yeah, I don't even really understand like what he's trying to say. Like I skimmed through it because he's just so verbose and he's got me blocked, so it's not like I can reply. But I was just like, Marcionism, like how is this a Marcion?
This would be the opposite of Marcionism, which would show that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So let's see what he says. He says, it's mind-boggling. I'm not arguing that Christianity should be pacifist. Andrew Wilson gives the example of selling your cloak to buy a sword from the Gospel of Luke. Well, that's actually been used many times to show that Jesus isn't pacifist. I'm an agnostic. He exegetes this wrong. Like, why are we going to listen to some atheist dude exegeting scripture? The point of the story is that Jesus knows he's going to be taken by the Romans. It's not to fight. Well, it is self-defense, though. Jesus says in the next sentence that he's done speaking to his disciples. He's doing it so that he will be taken with the fulfillment of prophecy. Yeah, but none of that shows that it's not self-defense still. Jesus' disciples said they already had 2 swords, and they said it is enough. Fighting off Romans who are there to keep the law? No. For looking for an armed band of transgressors? Yes. It's not just speculation. The swords are not for fighting or fighting back. Well, even still, like, this is just nitpicking because self-defense itself is biblical, and we have a long tradition of this. The Old Testament teaches that self-defense is biblical. You even have a duty to, as a man, defend your wife and kids, and you have to put your life on the line. In fact, when I was married in the church, we had, oaths that we say, will you give your life for her? Well, is that not talking about self-defense? I mean, that's crazy. So James Lindsay has no idea what he's talking about with just overall Christian ethics and moral and the history of the church, right? So he goes on to say, Peter draws the sword. Jesus rebukes him for it. His disciples weren't armed to fight back. I think the point, though, is that even though Jesus knew and they knew they were not going to have an armed insurrection, the principle of having the swords shows us that Jesus is not opposed to self-defense. In other words, the state itself having the ability to execute those who are worthy of the death penalty, a la Romans 13, that itself is a form of self-defense, right? The state executing the death penalty is self-defense. And there's also individual self-defense. So it's the principle of being able to have weapons and self-defense, even though, of course, Jesus wasn't saying that take these swords, we're going to go overthrow the Romans. That's the zealot position. But it still shows the principle of self-defense.
Well, it sounds to me like, because James Lindsay thinks that Christian nationalism is like a Nazi movement.
Yeah, he thinks it's a psyop, which is ridiculous because it's his position that's actually the psyop.
Yeah, and what Andrew did brilliantly, I'm glad you're going to review the trigonometry thing, because he argues for it. Christian nationalism from his view is not this idea that we're going to have an armed insurrection and take over the government. We're going to fight a new crusade. That's not what he's saying at all. He says what you were saying earlier, which is that as Christians, from our worldview, we are using our Christian worldview to determine morality, which is how you figure out what laws you're going to have and how you're going to govern your society, what is socially acceptable and not, and all those sorts of things. And he did a great job of breaking down Constantine's like liberal presuppositions, which are the same ones that James Lindsay holds. So of course I knew that's why he's upset about it, but he's acting like Andrew is out here calling for like an armed crusade or an armed insurrection to overthrow the U.S. government or something, which is
they're doing
not what
but no, but you know what's funny is that did you see earlier in the show? So Ruslan and Gavin Ortland are implying similar types of things. They're saying that ortho bros are now dangerous and dark things are coming and they're going to be hyped up. And Ortland said today, these people are extremists. Of course, he doesn't say who he's talking about. He's obviously talking about us. And they're dangerous and all this kind of stuff. When in reality, none of us are ever calling for violence. We're talking about the principle of self-defense and the Christian doctrine of the state. And these people are liars, and they repeat what sounds like an SPLC script. So I'm not surprised that James Lindsay repeats similar types of scripts. James Lindsay is in an open relationship with his wife and has been for a long time. He's a complete phony. And that's why he absolutely refused 4 different times an offer to do a public debate.
Yeah, I've offered to debate him on feminism multiple times because he gets a whole bunch of that wrong and insists that, you know, feminism is not the same thing as egalitarianism. And you know, I've challenged him on that and his whole liberal ethos. And all he does is block me and say that, you know, I'm some kind of pick me or whatever. He does that whole thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I tried, of course, again, here's another example where people say, oh, you're being mean. No, I tried being very, very friendly with James Lindsay for several years, actually. We went on 2 or 3 podcasts together. We had good conversations. In fact, I was even at an event where we had a 3-way debate between me, him, and whoever that fat Calvinist pastor is. I forget his name. Me and that fat Calvinist guy were just going at it like hardcore, and Lindsay was there just kind of laughing and kind of stayed out of it. But, you know, we had a 3-way discussion on whether or not America and Americanism are what Christianity was actually trying to promote, right? Because you have these Calvinist guys who think that in this situation, they were saying, oh, Nick Fuentes is the face of the woke right that is going to take down, you know, America and change the Constitution. And then that led into a debate about where I was arguing, I don't agree with Nick on everything, but I was arguing, well, actually Nick's not wrong in principle in saying that the church and the state have a role of helping to guide society together. And there's no such thing as this idea of a secular state or the Enlightenment Freemasonic idea of the separation of church and state like Roger Williams taught, right? And that just blows these people's minds, right? They absolutely lose it. And they will immediately call you, you know, everything in the book. So let's play his response here.
This idea of like Christian pacifism and Christians being pussies, I don't know where that came from.
Britain, I think.
Boy, that was never.
And so what about the teachings of Jesus Christ?
Now, this is so low tier, right? Like, obviously, if you're familiar with church history, we have so many warrior saints. You have countless kings that were saints. The Old Testament is full of people like David, you know, heroes of the faith, or Samson even. And if you read Hebrews 11, when Paul cites heroes of the faith, he also includes people who put to flight the wars and the foreigners and those of the enemy. So there's this idea that now that Jesus came, everything is now, quote, spiritual. That's actually the Marcionite position. The idea that God has nothing to do with the state, that's the Roger Williams position that we outlined last night and today, which is the Gavin Ortland. Again, Al Mohler, the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, invites on the CIA guys and the consultants and the counterintelligence people and pushes CIA lines that we've got to be doing espionage in other countries, and it's biblical because we got to fight Putin. So he just repeats the normie CIA stuff. And even if you think that's legitimate, that's night and day. Imagine Roger Williams, their spiritual forefather, saying that we got to have spies in other countries for the superstate, for the American empire. It's just retarded. It's the opposite of what the whole Baptist tradition was about, namely disestablishmentarianism. The idea there is no role that the state has to God. There's a separation, not just of church and state, but God from state. That's Roger Williams.
Which ones? Which ones do you want to dive into?
Well, I was raised as Catholic, so I'm not as well versed in scripture as you. When he was on the cross, forgive.
He doesn't know his own Catholic teaching for the last 1600 years in the West is the same position that the state has a duty to God. The state can execute criminals. You have a right to self. What Christian country has forbade the basic principles of self-defense? Now, you could say maybe the class system in Britain didn't allow people to have like swords and stuff like that at various times. But in general, the principle of Christian nations in the history of the church has allowed for self-defense. And the idea of having a Christian army that defends against invaders and foreigners, there's nothing, that's just taking the self-defense principle and applying it on a larger scale. And imagine actually arguing that, no, actually you have no right to self-defense. Remember Seraphim Aldea, that Marxist pacifist libtard that tries to argue against all the Orthodox converts in America, he says are satanic? That's what he said. He said, I went to all of the American parishes and churches and I didn't find one true convert. These were converts of the devil. Remember him saying that? Just outrageous, just total insane levels of prelest. The dude lives on an island under the protection of a state. Is he going to say that when the Muslims come into his little Scottish island or wherever he is? What's he going to say when the Muslims show up there? Is he going to appeal to pacifism? No, he's living under the benefits of a state that protects him, at least for this present time, against foreign invaders. Now, all of Europe is being invaded intentionally, by design, by oligarchs, bringing in zillions of infinity Muslims and others. So they're going to learn what their open borders pacifism, fake ass Christianity is actually going to get them when the Muslims come in, as they are doing right now. So all of these libtards who push this absolute made up pacifist idea, it doesn't exist in church history. And they'll pick out a monastic saint talking about vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. That's monastic life. That's not the state. And Nicaea already said in its canons, there's nothing antithetical to being a Christian and being a soldier. So that you understand, we've already had this debate. This debate happened in the 2nd and 3rd century because you had some groups amongst the church saying, like Roger Williams and the Baptists think, you can't have anything to do with the state because the state is the beast and it's Satan. Okay, we had this low tier Baptist level debate in the 2nd and 3rd century. And Nicaea already ruled on this, that there's nothing antithetical to being a soldier and being a Christian. And one of the arguments they used is John the Baptist saying to the soldiers say, John, what must we do to be right with God? And he says, don't mistreat people and don't take people's tax money or tax them more than they deserve. That was Nicaea's proof text. Well, obviously, if God didn't believe in self-defense or armies, John the Baptist would have said, you need to leave the army. You must leave it. This is so low tier. Like, it's just so silly. I mean, imagine thinking in the Middle Ages that when you have basically a Christian society, whether it's Byzantium or whether it's, a French village in the 1100s, like imagine thinking that, oh, you're not supposed to have any kind of borders or walls or defense. It's just retarded. Like everyone would just think you're insane. Like, what are you talking about? We have a castle because we have freaking looters and invading armies that come through here. So we're not supposed to have it's just retarded. Like, people are so dumb and living in some fantasy world because we've grown up in this peaceful post-World War II environment where they just think that, oh, everybody's cool and liberal. No, the Somalians coming into your neighborhoods, the Muslims coming into your neighborhood, they don't have the same, they don't care about civic nationalism and the Constitution and all this bullshit. They don't care about that. And you're going to find out that they don't care about that. You're already finding out. All the people in Britain are begging us in our country to help and figure out how to not let that happen here. Why? Why would they be begging us? If the Muslims are all going to be cool, dude. Everybody's going to be cool, bro. We'll all team up together.
Them, Lord, if they know not what they do.
Of course. And you should forgive people. I absolutely agree with that. I may forgive a man who attempted to rape my wife, but I'm going to kill him in the attempt, right? Like,
that's actually correct. It is not murder to practice self-defense. This is so basic, and people should know this. Does anybody, do you guys not realize that? What do you think would happen if somebody tried to get into the Vatican and do something to Pope Leo. What do you think would happen? I think Pope Leo would just lay there and let the butt buddies do whatever they want with him. Actually, in the case of the Pope, they might, right? But in theory, no. In practice, probably not, right? I mean, imagine somebody breaking into the Moscow Patriarchate, right? Do you think they would try to, oh, yeah, cool, just let him be pacifist, be pacifist. They would immediately assassinate him. He would be immediately taken out. Somebody rushes the Pope mobile, what do you think those 16 security guards are going to do? They're going to take him out immediately. Duh. The papacy practices self-defense. It has a giant Leonine wall around the papacy. It's a city-state. You can't just walk in there. You think you can just bust up in the Vatican Bank, be like, yeah, I'm here. I want to take all the cash, and you got to let me do it because of pacifism. You're going to be immediately arrested. Yes, you have a duty to unalive a person who is trying to unalive your family members. And if you don't do that, you have failed. I took an oath when I got married to do that. I have to lay down my life should someone try to come at Jamie. That's why we carry implements of self-defense when I go places. I have that duty. If I don't do that, I fail at my duties as a husband, as a man. And it's so insane to me that I look over here at the Catechism of Trent, their own Roman Catholic teachings, and they said that of course the church teaches the death penalty. It's part of the sixth commandment. And now Roman Catholic weirdos on podcasts act like Christianity is pacifism. That's the Marcionite view.
I don't, which thing's contradictory here? It's like, I can forgive my enemies, but that doesn't mean I need to let them crush me.
Drink too much milk theology.
Well, I mean, this guy sitting here looks like a total soy man, whoever this guy is. But yeah, it's like, there's nothing contradictory about saying that I have a duty to unalive. It's like the same with warfare, right? If I unalive people in warfare, I'm fulfilling the duty to defend my country. Let's say for the sake of argument that it's not some fake ass war or something that, we're fighting for Israel. If we're actually fighting for the defense of the country, like I have a duty to do that. And it's not ideal, but the church has for a long time said, yeah, we just talked about this with Pajot. Pajot came on and said, look, Orthodoxy is not pacifist. We recognize the unfortunate nature of this world requires things like warfare. It requires things like, assassinations even, perhaps. I'm not advocating for an assassination of a political leader. I'm just saying, like, in the history of Israel, for example, you'll see that there are spies, there is espionage, there are military tactics and techniques. They're all throughout the Bible. And the history of the church understood that reality. And it's not condoning every single act of violence or something like that to say, yes, there is a kind of just war. I would argue, yeah, there is a just war. It might be more scholastic and technical in the way that like Tim Gordon formulates it from Thomas Aquinas. But I think Thomas Aquinas is not really explicating anything that different from the way that the Byzantine leaders and patriarchs and armies would have thought about it. For example, under Empress, I think it was Irene, one of the empresses, she actually named a bunch of the military divisions after various saints. And that was That was normal in Byzantium. Nothing weird or bizarre about that. So all of this stuff that we're dealing with nowadays, again, it's radical Reformation teaching. It's not the Protestant reformers. They all believe what I say. Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, they would agree. Well, maybe not Zwingli, but Luther and Calvin at least would agree with what I'm saying. The state has a right to execute people. You have a right to self-defense. Death penalty is true and right. They all taught that. But what ended up winning is the radical Reformation, which did stress in many cases pacifism and the idea that the state is of God, or not of God, it's of Satan. Just crazy stuff, right? Disestablishmentarianism. That's what most of these evangelicals and even normie Roman Catholics like this guy, they think that's what Christianity is. It's radical Reformation, George Fox, Testament of Anne Lee pacifism.
Me. I can forgive people who have done me wrong. Doesn't mean I need to let them do me more wrong.
This is correct. It is technically correct that you can unalive a person and also forgive them. That is our duty as a Christian. It's not required that I resent and hate a person even if they do me wrong and I have to, in a certain case, unalive them. Think about all the situations in the history of the church where People had to defend their family or their kids. Does that make everybody in that case a murderer? That's just crazy. Does it mean that you then have to hate the people? No, it doesn't. So this is absolutely correct.
I can forgive people for doing horrible acts against me. It doesn't mean I need to continue to let them do horrible acts against me.
This is exactly right. Like, who actually doesn't agree with that? People might have criticisms of Andrew, whatever, but that point, that position is correct. There's nothing in theologically incorrect there.
Christian ethics has been widely bastardized by progressive leftists as being some kind of like hippie religion. It is definitely not.
That's absolutely correct.
Not. It never has been, and I don't know where that came from. Yes, it's true the teachings of Jesus Christ are very heavy on loving your neighbor and understanding forgiveness and understanding the mode of sin, and that most people are going to engage in sin, so we need the forgiveness of Jesus Christ for that. That's true. But it's not a pacifistic religion, and it never has been a Jesus told one of his disciples to sell a cloak and buy a sword. But these were not pacifists. Jesus ran money changers out of a temple that with a braided cord that he made out of leather and whipped them out of the temple.
Yeah, so again, there are times for these types of actions, right? What does Ecclesiastes say? There's a time for war, a time for peace, a time for mourning, a time for joy. And a lot of people don't understand the nuances and what we call decorum or propriety when it comes to these types of topics, right? For example, there's a time for celebration. Jesus attended the wedding at Cana and he drank wine. Does that mean that every day is a wine drinking wedding celebration? No, of course not. Go ahead. What?
I was joking.
What'd you say? You cut out. I didn't hear.
I was saying, wait, what?
You don't know that. Well, I'm just saying. You know how evangelicals will like take a verse and act like that's the verse for everything at all times, right? Like you should never. Like there was a guy on Twitter today saying.
Whatsoever.
There was a guy on Twitter saying today, it's ungodly if you ever make a joke. Like this like mega piety signaling stuff. And it's like, I mean, you think there's no time for mirth? That's crazy. Like there's read Ecclesiastes. Like there's a time for all of these things. There's a season for these things. And the absurdity of evangelicalism or the way these childish people interpret the scriptures is like they take one verse and they think that that's over everything else, right? Like, well, God says, love your neighbor and not to judge. Okay, but he also says judge with righteous judgment. So you're picking out one verse to piety signal and ignoring the other places where you have to obviously make judgment calls. So if you're in an alley and your wife is, got her purse out and there's some, thug dude that's coming down the alley and he looks suspicious, are you not going to make a judgment call? It's just retarded. Everybody is. Of course it is. Of course you are. So, I think even if the selling of the sword might not have been the most pertinent example, you could have said Romans 13, that there are examples of self-defense. The principle of Jesus having his disciples have the sword still is a principle of self-defense. So I think Andrew is overall absolutely correct. I would have used Romans 13, but so what? It's not. This doesn't. I mean, James Lindsay is just capitalizing on this to say that we're all bad because the woke right is an op, and he's just mouthing what Netanyahu says. Right? The woke right. More like the woke Reich. 2 weeks, Iran has nuclear bomb. Come on, dude. Michael, you want to unmute?
Yeah, hey everybody. I was just gonna say I don't understand this whole self-defense debate. How all these Christians, all these Catholics, they're so outspoken about. Go ahead. Sorry.
I didn't say anything.
Okay. I don't understand how they're so outspoken about all these different things, like self-defense, and then you get to the trans issue. There's no one to speak up about it. I mean, you don't have the high, the Pope and the cardinals and everybody. Well, I mean, you have some cardinals, but you have a lot of folks that don't espouse any of that. And by the way, self-defense, that was a really nice claim that you could make a couple thousand years ago when the punishments were way harsher. You had a system of government that would treat criminals very harshly. So rapes, murders, I mean, even theft was dealt with very, very harshly. So The fact that self-defense nowadays is even looked at the way it is, it just doesn't make any sense. But
I'm not
yeah,
understand.
I mean,
I don't understand your argument. What doesn't make sense? Whose position?
so I don't understand why there's folks that are against the argument that we pick up a sword and we harshly penalize criminals, thugs, gangsters, defending our home, any kind of self-defense. I don't care what kind of self-defense. I don't understand what the problem is with these atheists, these liberals, and trying to use God to justify going soft on crime.
Well, they are the mouthpiece of the establishment, and the establishment promotes pacifism as a technique and a strategy to destroy civilizations. That's why.
Right. So, I mean, that's my point. So, yeah, and I'm probably just tired and I'm not making a great point here, but, yeah, I mean, self-defense, you can debate that. You can't debate the whole trans sexual mutilation point. So my thing is, even for the Christians, the Catholics out there, is this the hill you want to die on? You want to be so devout that you're going to fight on that hill, and then you're going to be completely silent on people transing kids without parental consent even? That's destroying God's image. That's not for debate.
Well, there's a connection there between the pacifism of these fake Marcionite, modern, Roger Williams style, evangelical style pacifist so-called Christians, and allowing people to do that to their children. It's the same cowardice that would say you should not defend yourself, you should be a doormat, that would make you the ultimate doormat to allow people to do that to your offspring. So absolutely it's connected. Now, again, Exodus 22, great passage that's overlooked. People forget that Exodus 22 lays down the principles for self-defense, right? And this is only 2 chapters after the 10 Commandments. Now, the moral principle here is still applicable. I'm not saying that everything in the book of Exodus in terms of the ceremonial laws continues on for Christians, but the church has historically understood what does carry on is this type of a moral principle. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it, he shall restore fivefold. Jesus, for example, in the New Testament, he applauds Zacchaeus when Zacchaeus says, if I've wronged anyone, I restore fivefold, right? Or fourfold, whatever he says. He's doing what was the principle for theft in Exodus 22. So Jesus affirms the goodness of the principle of restitution. Why would Jesus do that if he's coming to establish some totally new pacifist religion that's not based on what came before? If a thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there is no guilt for his bloodshed. So actually, I would argue, no, you can't actually debate self-defense. There is no debate. I mean, you could be a coward and say that you don't have to defend, people when they're, defend the weak. But, when Saint Cyril and Methodius, the famous story, the Muslims said, you Christians believe in love your neighbor, and you're inconsistent because you say turn the cheek, and yet you go to war. And I believe it's, if I'm going from memory, it's St. Cyril says, well, Jesus said there's no greater love that a man has than to lay down his life for his friend. And laying down your life doesn't have to mean, pacifistic sacrifice. It can also be in the case of defense. That's the context that St. Cyril and Methodius say that to the Saracen that they're speaking to. At least that's the story. And I think that illustrates the very point I'm making here. Now, I noticed, by the way, speaking of foundations, think tanks, NGOs, and whatnot, trying to change things, I noticed Fordham had a symposium the other day, and it was a bunch of these, Skittles, weirdo, liberal women, academics, so-called, and their whole symposium was about how Christianity has nothing to do with the state, and that Byzantine law, trying to have Christian law, was like the worst thing ever. And it was this patriarchal dominant. It was so gay, dude. It was like unbelievable. But that's CIA Jesuit University, right? Fordham University. And their whole thing is Skittles, pacifism, ecumenism, you name it. Women deacons. Do you guys not see all these things go together? Of course, they want the West deracinated and emasculated because then it will be conquered. And what better way to do that than to promote Skittles, feminism, pacifism, ecumenism, all the stuff that we're talking about. And that's the level most people don't understand. It's not just a question of what theology nerds are debating. It's also a civilizational geopolitical war, right? To change society and to change the West, the liberal ethos is a giant social engineering tool. And people like James Lindsay are mouthpieces of that. They're fake conservatives. Nicholas, what's up? Unmute.
Hey, Jake, can you hear me?
Yo.
Great to be on here. Really big fan of yours. I recently became an Orthodox Christian, and I go over to a Rocor parish with Metropolitan Jonah, and actually, I think your friend Jim.
Jim Jatras is great guy.
Who's that?
Yes, Jim Jatras is a great guy. Absolutely.
Yeah. I just have a question because I kind of hopped in. I heard you guys talking about self-defense. I come from evangelical Christianity, but I'm kind of really confused on how to synergize. I guess it's called like pacifism. But I guess I was always under the understanding that, like, when I see Christ on the cross, like, I see him sacrificing his life, and I kind of understand that as, like, he has all the authority to kind of rain down vengeance in a way, or kind of return eye for eye.
Okay, so I'm gonna pause you right there because this is a perfect example of what I was saying about 10 minutes ago. I'm not faulting you for not hearing what we talked about 10 minutes ago. You might have just got here, but there's a time and a place for everything, right? So, for example, I don't take one instance of the gospel and then say that, for example, the church must at all times, forever, universally only do that thing. If you read the book of Ecclesiastes, it's telling you there's a time for war, a time for peace, a time for mourning, and a time for mirth. There's a time for those things. And yes, Jesus is coming as the suffering servant at his first advent to die for us for sin. That doesn't mean that I'm supposed to be a doormat and always only be a sacrificial victim. So it takes wisdom to know when to apply the right thing to the right situation. And that's why if you read Hebrews 11, you'll notice that not everybody who's lauded and praised in the list there of the Hall of Faith, they're not all pacifists. There's situations where in some cases, like the woman in Maccabees, she accepted martyrdom to have a greater resurrection. But there were other situations where saints were put into a providential situation where they were called to go to battle. And they are lauded and praised for driving out the foreigner and defending their lands. Hebrews 11. The history of the church is replete with all kinds of saints, martyrs, and saint kings. It runs the gamut. So, and I'm not faulting you, but evangelicalism does this all the time, where they act like children when they read the Bible, and they take one verse and they think that that's the one moral thing that you must always do in every situation. They universalize it. Don't judge, brother. Don't judge. Don't judge. Don't judge. Okay, yeah, I'm not supposed to judge in the sense of being a hypocrite. If you have the same sin, you can't judge that person. But you're also called to judge. In other cases, John 7:24, judge with righteous judgment. Well, how can I judge a righteous judgment if I'm not supposed to judge? Okay, this is how you interpret books. And everybody
Don't you have to judge the verse?
Go ahead.
Don't you have to judge the verse? Don't you make a judgment about the verse, about judgment?
Yeah, or like when Solomon says in Proverbs, avoid the fool. Well, how can I avoid the fool if I don't judge someone to be a fool? Well, how can I judge someone to be a fool if I'm not judging? It's just silly. Like, people act like children.
What's so silly too is, like you said, they take it out of context, right? They're always quote mining. It explains right after there.
Yeah.
In as much as you judge, you'll be judged in the same standard. So if you judge righteously and correctly, you'll be judged by that same standard. So it actually shows that it's not an absolute. I mean, literally in the next line of but like, of course, people read what they want to read into text.
Yeah, they don't have basic interpretive hermeneutic skills, right? To interpret a text according to the context, according to the totality of that book, and according to the totality of scriptures and the tradition of the church, right? All those things inform how we read the text.
That's why, I keep going with this argument lately when Protestants are like, let's go to the scripture. I'm like, why? You're retarded and you can't read. Why would we go to the one thing that you obviously can't? And you see, when you get in debates, it's just going to be like, oh, that's not what it means. It means this. It's like, well, you obviously can't read. How about that?
Saint Minos is the Roman army warrior saint, regarded as a martyr, wonder worker, and warrior saint. He's one of many, many, many examples. And I thank you for this in the chat there, because people bring this stuff up all the time, and it's like they don't even recognize that. I mean, Saint Stephen of Serbia, right? The king of Serbia.
Saint Stephen Chalmare is... sorry, I mixed my Romanian. Saint Stephen the Great from Romania, Moldova.
How could you have a king saint if kings and the state were satanic and not of God? It's so stupid. Like, it's just childish.
You know what? He was known to... He literally destroyed Muslims, and every time he destroyed a group of Muslims, he brought the church to God and thanked God for allowing him to destroy the Muslims.
This is exactly right. And this is another reason why the technocrats and the social engineers want us to be pacifists, is precisely because they want the West conquered by Islam, by design. So they know that Islam has that aggression, and they want the Christians and all these... Could you imagine evangelical Gavin Ortland Christianity standing up against Islam? No, it's the very thing that lets the doors open in Byzantium to let him in. Gavin Ortland's open borders type of softness, and he had that famous tweet about being soft on immigration. That's to let the people in, you idiots. So the fake Christians, and by the way, Ruslan too. Ruslan had the exact same soft-ass position on this stuff, because those are the mouthpieces to let you get conquered, and they're paid very well to do that, in my opinion.